Hello and welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. Today I have the Buffalo Trace whiskey on my cask, and the Buffalo Trace has a very interesting story. If you'd like to know more about the story, I've done a distillery video inside the distillery on the campus of the Buffalo Trace distillery. Just go to the YouTube channel or on the blog and look for Buffalo Trace Distillery and you will find it. Buffalo Trace Distillery was founded near the Kentucky River, and it was called Buffalo Trace because there was actually a buffalo trace there where the buffaloes were crossing the Kentucky River. So that's why they call themselves Buffalo Trace. It's a Kentucky straight bourbon, 40% ABV. Kentucky straight bourbon is uncolored, fresh casks, all that stuff that is associated with Kentucky straight bourbon. What is really interesting is that the Buffalo Trace Distillery is the oldest continuous producing whiskey distillery inside the United States of America. Because we had a time of prohibition, and during prohibition all the distilleries had to be shut down because alcohol was illegal inside the United States of America. And what the people in the Buffalo Trace Distillery did was they produced medicine. They actually produced medicine, and yeah, it was whiskey, but they produced the alcohol and sold it through doctors, apothecaries, and all that kind of stuff. And people would go there to their doctor and says, "Oh, I have that and that kind of illness. Yeah, here you go. You have, you get this medicine here from the Buffalo Trace Distillery." Yeah, back in the days, bourbon was actually a medicine. If you use bourbon as a medicine, you can disinfect wounds, but be careful, only use the high proof stuff. You can use a normal bourbon 40% for disinfecting a wound, but I would recommend the higher ABVs because it's just better. And back in the days, actually, a lot of people in Kentucky misused this medicine as a way of getting drunk. So there were guys fathers getting into their doctors and say, "All my family is ill, please prescribe me a lot." And then he got many bottles for even 5-year-old children, but I don't think the children got any bourbon. It was all for the father. Yeah, so that's a bit of a background story about how the Buffalo Trace Distillery became the longest producing whiskey distillery all over the United States. Yeah. It's made, the mash bill is made from corn, rye, and malted barley. And what is very interesting is that they don't put it all in one mash tun, but they do it separately. They have different mash tuns for their different grains, and then they do have them combined later. So it's one of these unique things. But watch the distillery video. I think it's now already 4 years ago, and I can't remember all the details how they do it. If you watch the distillery video, you can actually see the grain cookers and the fermenters and the distills of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I love the style of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Although it's the oldest producing distillery, the name Buffalo Trace is I'm not quite sure how old it is because it sometimes had been called the Buffalo Trace Distillery even in the past, but it used to be the Ancient Age Distillery. So if you go back, you will not find the Buffalo Trace Distillery, but Ancient Age, there are old signs with Ancient Age as well on the Buffalo Trace Distillery, but they changed their name to a bit more American, iconic symbolism. And yeah, it's a typical bourbon. It's got a lot of vanilla, a lot of caramel, but it's a bit more fresh. I do think there is a good amount of rye in there. So you do have a bit of a minty note. I always associate that also with a bit of a pine wood note. So imagine yourself going through one of these pine woods, and just the pine cones are just cracked open, and you have that smell of resin in the air, and it's just somehow fresh, also a bit smells of bit of a gluey taste, where you have that sticky resin of these pine cones combined with a lot of sweetness. Oh, it's beautiful. It's nice smelling. I don't think it's not one of the more expensive whiskeys. It's not one of the cheapers as well. It's one of the medium-priced premium whiskeys, not the luxury ones, but the bit more above average whiskeys. So it's a well mixture between a drinking and a sipping whiskey. It's sweet, yeah, it's bourbon, all right, but surprisingly spicy. They have a lot of influences of you realize the spiciness comes a bit from the wood. There's also a spiciness from the rye in there, and it's said to be 8 years of age. No, they don't write it on there, but we got it from the distributor that it's 8 years of age. But if you don't write it on the bottle, you can't really prove that it is 8 years of age. So, but it's one of these whiskeys that is a bit older. Sure, it can't hold up to a 12-year-old bourbon or something like that. It's not one of the extremely cask-heavy ones, but it is already strongly on the not strongly, but is on the cask side. You have a lot of oak there. You have combined with a good amount of sweetness, and it's already going a bit into these older fruitiness characters. They have a bit of a slightly dried fruitiness there. Combined, it's very complex for one of these normal whiskeys, not one of these high premium whiskeys. This is about 22 euros, $25, something like that. It's nice. Yeah, the distillery of Buffalo Trace really puts a lot of thought into their maturation process. If you watch the distillery video, you see that they have a lot of warehouses, different parts of the distillery. They have experiments how to mature whiskey, and they really put a lot of thought into maturing it. And you realize that one is very, very well matured. So it's not one of these younger, just sweeteners and going out there whiskeys, but it's a good matured, normal American Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Yeah, I like it. If you see it on the shelf and you don't mind spending $25, then you might as well give it a buy. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.